Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Jeff Spees. He's an oncologist and palliative care physician, and he's the author of the book, Dying with Ease, a compassionate guide for making wiser end-of-life decisions. He contributed an excerpt from that book on Kevin MD, and that's titled, Death is Personal for This Physician. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a delight to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
We'll get into your book and article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Sure. So I started off in hematology oncology back when they were always combined in the mid 80s, and found very quickly that what kept me going in practice was the cancer patients and learning their stories, getting to know them, their families, what was going on in their lives. And for me also, taking care of these patients with cancer involved continuing to take care of them until they died. And I know that's not typical for a lot of oncologists, but it was for me. And I was practicing in a small Midwestern city. There was a local hospice that was all volunteers. And so I became a volunteer hospice medical director. I gradually increased in my interest there and had an opportunity in about 2001 to make a career change. Was able to jump back into the academic world, where I joined the faculty at the University of Iowa College of Medicine, where I taught and saw cancer patients to earn my salary, and headed up the palliative care program because that's what I wanted to do. But then since 2005, I was a full-time hospice medical director in Cleveland at a large urban and multi-county hospice, and retired from there very recently.
Let's talk about your book and the article that you contributed. And the title of the excerpt is Death is Personal for This Physician, and it comes from your book, Dying with Ease, a compassionate guide for making wiser end-of-life decisions. Now, for those who didn't read that excerpt, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to share it?
Sure. So the excerpt starts with just the facts that about 3 million Americans die every year, and that the big statistic that often doesn't get talked about is that the most common cause of death, of course, is being alive. I also then compared a way to think about dying in the idea of thinking about being born, that none of us remembers that, but we all know it happened, and use a little bit of a thought experiment to think about your navel and why it's there, and to look at it and just remember why it's there, and use it as a reminder that you will also, as you were born, you will also die. And then I run through a little bit of the career thing that I talked about, and the fact that what really informed my writing this excerpt and also the book was the things that I learned from the patients I was taking care of. Kevin, that if we are aware in what's going on, we all learn from our patients. And sometimes that's disease stuff, or sometimes that's treatment stuff. But for me, it was also meaning stuff. And the big thing that I learned was that it's okay to recognize that I'm mortal. And it's actually more than okay. It's really necessary. I'm convinced that as docs, we would do a better job in counseling our patients and helping them with their decision-making, doing those advanced care planning, advanced directive discussions, if we were more comfortable with our own mortality. Because just like it's frightening for the patient, just like it's frightening for the family members sitting in the room, it's also a little frightening and a little threatening for us. And I think if we did our personal death work a little better, we might actually be more effective in caring for our patients.
So what are some suggestions of ways that we in medicine can come to terms with our mortality? Do you have any techniques or exercises that you recommend?
Yeah, I do. And of course, I'll recommend everybody buy my book. But what did it for me was an exercise that I actually included in a chapter, and it's not unique to me. I learned it from being a participant in a group exercise. That is a thought experiment that takes a person from the being a normal, healthy person. When I did this in group, it started with I'm in the shower and I feel a little lump in my neck. In the book, I had to change the story to make it work in written form, and it starts with being, getting your picture taken and your wife noticing your eyes look a little yellow, and then going from that healthy person through sequential loss. Because one thing that we as living healthy people share with the dying is that we know about losing things, and that losing might be losing your phone for 10 minutes, or it might be losing your mother. But one thing that the dying do is they lose everything. And to go through that exercise is, I think, really quite informative in it, because it gets to the fear. It gets to where the real issue is, which isn't so much yes, I know I'm going to die and I need to get my advance directives done and I need to have my estate planning done and this kind of stuff. It gets from here to here. And that's where the fear is. That's where the suffering happens. Now, if you don't want to go through if people don't want to go through a big formal article or a big formal exercise, one thing that's really quite informative for anybody is to make out those advance directives, and then to have the honest conversation with the person you choose as your surrogate decision maker. Not just to say what you want, but to say why you want it. And that gets you then a bit to who you are as an individual and being okay a little bit more with dying. Now, I am looking forward to this myself. I'm not suggesting we all go jump off bridges or anything like that, but to think that, okay, I'm going to die. I can't do anything about that fact. I can do something about what happens leading up to it. But I got to do what I need to do is to make sure that whatever happens, that it's okay, that somehow I'll be okay with it.
Now, I'm in internal medicine and I do primary care. And like many primary care doctors, the number of check boxes, the number of requirements that we're forced to do within shrinking time requirements in each patient visit is just getting worse. Now, what are some tips that you could share to continue to include end-of-life decision-making and advanced directives kind of within a constrained primary care visit?
That is a brilliant question, Kevin. And that's one of the reasons I didn't stay in primary care, because, I don't think I could have done it. But when I talk to my internist, I just can't imagine what he's going through. I think it's tough. One of the things is that you don't have to do the big, long conversation as a big, long conversation. It can be little snippets. And sometimes it is best that you say, okay, we're going to make an appointment, and this is what we're going to do, is we're going to talk. Sometimes that works. Sometimes that's, I guess the one advice I have for all docs is to listen more and talk less. And I know people can ramble. I'm a good rambler, but bring it up. Have you thought about, do you have an advanced directives? Have you thought about it? Tell me about that. And maybe then bring it up again another time or two down the road. One thing that is a helpful technique actually came from an oncology study that showed that when you're having conversations with people about decisions to make, to include a little negative information. So in the study, it was lung cancer. It was for people, say, going into a second line therapy for non-small cell lung cancer, that if you include a little bit of negative information, it changes the dynamic down the road. And for the lung cancer, it was going from something as simple to as saying, this new treatment has about a 25% chance of working, versus this treatment has about a 25% chance of working, but most of the time it's not helpful. That doesn't change the decision that's made, or at least doesn't often change the decision that's made at that time, but it changes the decision the next time. Because once people who have heard, they get past that shock business. Another advice I would give to docs is to use the words. The number of people that I had referred in my oncology practice who had never heard the word cancer applied to them. They heard tumor, malignancy, swelling, lumps, lesions, things like that. They hadn't heard the cancer word. And it still happens in the hospice world. The number of people referred to hospice who don't realize that this is about this living the last bit of time before you die, to use the words death and dying. A friend who's a chaplain at the Cleveland Clinic, and she says in teaching medical students to use the die word, at least in their own conversations. She says expiring is for magazines and milk, and passing is for kidney stones and exams. People die.
We're talking to Jeff Spieth. He's an oncologist and palliative care physician, and he's the author of the book, Dying with Ease, a compassionate guide for making wiser end-of-life decisions. Jeff, from the research and writing your book and the response that you've gotten from the book, what would you say are still the biggest challenges that face palliative care going forward?
Wow. Well, the biggest immediate challenge facing palliative care going forward is workforce, because one of the issues is just what you said, that primary care docs are increasingly judged by throughput and getting all the boxes checked. And even hospitalists are now, have the same kinds of approaches. And having the palliative care ability to help with the conversations, I think is a gigantic thing, but there's just not enough people to do it. The idea of training primary palliative care, I think is good, but as you mentioned, that adds one more thing to your skill set, but also to your responsibilities. So the initial thing is workforce. Think about it as a career, everybody out there. It's good. Yeah.
And if primary care clinicians want to find out more about how they can improve their palliative care skills, other than your book, are there any resources online that you recommend?
Oh boy, I should have looked to get things, but CAPC, the Center to Advance Palliative Care, is a great resource. If you're more interested in the end of life piece of that, the National Hospice Palliative Care Organization or the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine have lots of good resources out there.
And my final question, what's your take-home message you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
I think the take-home message that I would like to leave is recognize that you're mortal and be okay with that, and let it inform then your practice. Yeah. And
Jeff, how can people find your book?
So I'm on Amazon. If they want to get directly with me, the website is drjeffspieth.com.
Jeff, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. It's been a delight.